All right. Hey guys, as always, I am so blessed because so many people walk through these doors every day here at Sutter Metals, and today I got the opportunity to be with Sean Davidson from the Davis Index. I've been utilizing Sean's services now in terms of pricing commodities for a good little while now. I was introduced to him through our commercial buying manager, Michael Richards, and I've been nothing but impressed with what the Davis Index is out there doing. And so I just wanted to take a minute to sit down and chat with Sean today, and also talk a little bit about Davis Index, talk about his life in the scrap business, and kind of hear from him. So I'm going to just fire it off and just get right into it. But sure. Kind of tell me the mission of why you started Davis Index.
Well, we started Davis because, I had, I spent many years with some of the other publications, right, in various capacities. And, after 12 years of doing it, I kind of needed a break, and I'd been in tech for a long time and part of various tech startups, both as as an angel investor, as a team that evaluated startups and things like that, and been doing it for 15 years. In fact, before I joined the industry, I had my own tech startup that I had exited when I was in New York, and so I decided to take a break, and so I left my role at Argus, and I was designing something for the industry, some software for the industry, and within 2 months of me, quit, ending my tenure at Argus, a whole bunch of the Ferris people chased me down and said, "Hey man, we need something for Ferris," because, a lot of the markets that, like bulk and container markets, a lot of the markets that are actually trading, frequently are not well covered with, by the existing publications. A lot of the data that's published is inaccurate. The services are way too expensive. There was a lot of issues. And then also just from a technology play, the technology is obsolete, right? I understand it. These companies have been around a long time, right? And they're built on very old technology stacks, so they don't scale properly. They're not designed for mobile, things like that. So it was a good opportunity to play, to combine a lot of my loves. I love the scrap industry, so this was great. I was really, really keen on doing technology, but they came back and said, no, we need information. And I understand that business really well. I've done it for 12 years, right? So it's not what I intended to do, but it's what ended up happening. Yeah. And, I'm glad we did it, honestly, because I'm really proud of what the team has achieved, at Davis. You guys use it, it's, and we're still growing it, but it's been, it's quite, this, this is your business, you've grown it organically, right? You take a lot of pride in seeing something at a seed stage, back in, the LA conference, it was an idea, and here we are 2 years later, and, it's a full-fledged product. We have a team of over 60 people, we've got over 1,000 people on the platform, and it's, every day the feedback is fantastic. Obviously, we make mistakes along the way, in terms of we think that this tool will work well if the button's here or whatever, and people will say, "Hey, I hate that. What the fuck is wrong when you put it here?" So that, and that's great because that feedback's been awesome for us. People that want more coverage, hey, can you add this? Can you add that? So, but overall, it's been really nice to see it. It's not without its challenges, like any business. COVID was tough, obviously, but you mentioned, you're blessed, and that's what I feel, right? I genuinely feel blessed that, that I was able to chance upon this, this enterprise, and, I can't wait to see where it goes. 12 years later, we were sitting here with you, and, and you're obviously very proud of what you've accomplished, and you should be. And I think that hopefully, in 10 years, we should, we'll do another catch up, and, well, let's see where we are.
Yeah, I have no doubt. I have no doubt of that. So you were at Argus then. For some reason, I thought you were at AMM.
Oh, I was. So I was at AMM. So I started in the industry with AMM. Back then it was just AMM. AMM had acquired INH, which was then called Scrap Price Bulletin, and it was the sister company was Metal Bulletin. And so during my time there was a steel entity created called Steel First, which they wrapped up a couple of years later. So I got involved with non-ferrous first, and then I, grew into a role where I was doing ferrous, and then I was heading all raw materials, not just for AMM, but also for Metal Bulletin, globally, handling raw materials. I was there for a long time. It gave me a chance to meet the industry, right? I met a lot of interesting people. I realized how underrepresented this recycling industry was, the scrap industry was, during my time there. And I fell in love with the industry because of the people. We should, and we like talking about the fact that we're a green industry, and because we are, right? And I don't think we do, as an industry, do a good job talking about the actual difference we make, right? But I actually fell in love with the industry not because of the fact that it had this whole green thing, and I was younger back then, and I was like waving that whole green recycling flag and look at me, I'm woke. No, none of that. It was just the people. I actually enjoy the people, because it's not like there's so many different personalities in an industry, right? There are also characters, right? And it straddles the entire chain, right? I met people that were willing to teach me, which you don't really find in a lot of industries, and that's when I realized that I wanted to do something for the industry, and and a large part of me moving to August was that, right? Like, I think we built a really good platform at August. It was called August Metal Prices. I got to build that from scratch, and that was a good project because, it was a step in the right direction. And so my personal goal will always be to help the industry, right? So let's give the industry the tools it needs to succeed, right? And as long as we can deliver value, right, and not make it a part of the transactional cost, I think that's good. That's good business, and that will always be our mission.
So my big thing about understanding indexes yourselves, Argus, AMM is, and this is kind of where my mind goes, is obviously antitrust is a big issue, and antitrust is a big issue in this, in this industry, and you think about that. So how do you feel? I mean, tell me how you feel about that in terms of pricing and giving out that information. Do you feel that obviously you feel as though that pricing should be out there and in the marketplace and available for people to, but does it start to impede on those antitrust laws?
No.
How do you feel about that?
No, it doesn't. So I mean, look, at the end of the day, these are media institutions, right? I mean, it's one of the fundamental rights, right? Speech, and so journalism at the end of the day will be protected, right? It will always be, because you need some level of transparency. I get where you're coming from on can information impede, and I will tell you, even though we're an information provider, yes, it absolutely can. I think too much transparency, and I'm pretty sure this will be an unpopular view between within the journalism community, right? The trade journalism community. But I think too much transparency is bad, and I don't care if they go and quote me on this because, and I'm not saying it's bad because it hurts one side or the other, but too much transparency on price can impede a business's ability to do business. And if you're an export yard buying scrap to load a bulk vessel, for example, right? There's a reason why if the market's rising, those deals are reported a bit later because the bulk yards want to be able to load scrap in, right? Collect the scrap against that. So we understand why they're doing that. But at the same time, the mill that has bought that scrap at a higher price wants that information to go out because they need to push the steel price higher, right? So there's always an incentive for the information. So would we go and make that transparent? Absolutely we would, right? But if a company is having some issues internally, right, where they're trying to sort out maybe something related to resource, human resources, or whether it's, some kind of companies will always go through financial struggles, right? So just because a company has changed banks, for example, or, any of that, and we are privy to a lot of that information, you will never find us report that because I can't see how that helps. Why would we want to, we will use our platform to help the industry and protect the industry, right? So if local organizations are going against recycling companies, we will come out in favor of the recycling industry and say, hey, hang on, you haven't understood what this industry does. Shut the fuck up and pay attention, right? Come understand what we do before you start telling us not to run a scrapyard in your backyard, right? But so when it comes to the antitrust aspect of pricing, because I think when you go to conventions, they give you that letter. 100%. I think that's more to prevent y'all, right? Scrap companies from talking to each other about prices, right? Because they don't want y'all to collude and do price fixing, right? Say, hey, why don't we all go ahead and offer the mill this one price or, whatever, right? That's what they want to prevent. That's what antitrust is there for. In our capacity, what we're doing is we're contacting buyers and sellers and we're saying, hey, have you bought something today? Have you sold something today? We're doing an information gather, right? And then we're using our methodologies to say, hey, basis the information we've gathered, we feel like, this is an accurate representation of your market, right? the fundamental difference between what we're doing at Davis Index and any other publication is that we publish only price indexes. And I think this is where that quality kicks in, right? The traditional way of doing things, and it's not just in metals, it's in most physical commodities, has been this thing called an assessment. So even though the industry colloquially looks at some other publication and says, oh, what is the index done? It's actually not an index, right? Those are assessments. In an assessment, you have someone that calls a couple of people. They get some inputs and then they use that information to publish something, right? And you'll see wide price ranges, you'll see weird things happening, right?
So do you see people trying to manipulate that with you as you're out there trying to price certain commodities or give indexes to certain commodities?
Yeah,
on the resale market?
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. People are, and I think you should. I think that every market participant that feels like they use the data for whatever, whether it's a purchase decision or a sales decision or an industrial contract or whatever, I actually feel that they should be, trying to influence the number, right? Absolutely.
Manipulate you.
It's not manipulate, I know what you mean by manipulate because, some publications have been accused of that and, and I would say that, yeah, maybe, I'm not going to say that there aren't people that try to do it. There absolutely are. So I think that the fairer word to use, because again, look, in any practice, in any industry, you're going to have some people that, just don't do things the right way, but most people do it the right way, right? And I think that for the most part, people are should have an influence on the data, right? So I think that's fine. And if they're trying to manipulate it, let people be who they are, right? Our job is to filter through all that, right? And to understand what the bullshit is,
right.
And that's where a really strong, adherence to methodology comes in, right? So if you have discipline and if you have proper structure and you go, hey, you just assume that everyone's trying to manipulate, right? Let's make that your basic assumption, right?
Yeah.
And what have you built in place? What technologies have you built in place? What kind of filters have you built in place, right? To ensure that once all of this comes in, you're not allowing any bias, right? Whether it's a buy-side bias, a sell-side bias, some trader in the middle trying to, because they're brokering a deal, right? And I think that's where we excel because we don't do the assessments nonsense. We don't, we've built technology that allows us to do all this and then publish indexes. So we will qualify, is this an actual transaction? Is it a bid? Is it an offer? What was the tonnage? What was the delivery time? What was the payment term? We normalize all of that to a base spec. And then from there, we calculate a volume weighted index. We're the only ones doing it for everything. Other publications will have maybe 5 or 10, a really small percentage of true indexes, right? Most of them are assessments. We don't do any assessments. We only do indexes. So you'll see that rigor. I think we're in an age today where this old way of doing pricing, and publishing pricing, it has to change, right? It's been too inefficient and too easily manipulated, to your point, for a long time. And there may have been times in the past where we were manipulated and we didn't even realize. I'll admit that. Like anything, you might buy something, receive some material in, right, and pay a price, and then when you actually go and you examine the entire lot, you might find something completely different, right? Shit happens, right? You have to learn. That's how you learn, right?
Yeah,
and I think that
it's a scrap business.
I think it's in any business, right?
Yeah.
You just that's how you learn, right? You just you get screwed over and you learn from it, and then you get screwed over again. Do you know what I mean? It's just, shit, if all of us had just these, frictionless, non-issue parts to everything, then life would be too dull and too boring.
So who's the biggest, or who's the bigger benefactor to your indexes? Is it the mills, or is it the sellers like myself, the collectors and the...
I like to think that when it comes to our platform, it's both. It's all. Okay. Think about how we're structured, right? For example, our tech doesn't allow a buy side or a sell side bias. And what I mean by that is, let's assume that we're pricing a market, right?
It doesn't allow it right now. I believe you and I have talked, and you have some technology coming online though, where eventually it might, right?
That technology is already up. Okay. That's already in our index methodology, right?
Right.
So the way it works is let's say that, look, it took a year to build this technology. We're the only company in the world with this technology across any pricing, price reporting agency, right? Because we spent a lot of time perfecting this, and we're still far away from perfecting it, but we're on the way, right? What we do is, let's say that we're pricing, I don't know, the price of plastic bottles in Tacoma, right? And this week, our people have gone out and gathered data, and we've only managed to gather data from the sellers, right? And so the seller said, hey, I've been selling 1 ton of, this plastic bottle, grade, whatever. I don't know anything about plastics, but whatever, HDPE, A plus, whatever the grade is, right? And so we, obviously we have to standardize that. So that grade, and everyone goes and says, and all the sellers give us inputs of like $100 to $110, and all of them claim that they have sold. So we've, because in the next step of verification, we say, hey, is this an actual transaction? Is it just an offer price? What is it, right? So let's assume that we get a range of 100 to 110, right? And everyone says that they sold, and they give us their volumes or whatever, right? And let's assume that all of them are bullshitting us, right? All of them, okay? The way the technology is designed is that what we do is we know, because we've been doing it every week, right, or daily, depending on the market, right? We have all that previous history, right? So we know what the standard differential is between the bid and offer range, right? Or the inputs that come in from sellers and the inputs that come in from buyers, right? And specifically, individually for that seller or for that buyer, how is that input compared to our final index, right? So the technology, the software, will know that, hey, this week you've got only seller inputs, right? This is how they average against the index normally, right? So this seller is always whatever 5 too high or 5 too low, whatever, right? This seller is always bullshitting us by $20, whatever, right? Do you know what I mean?
Okay.
And also the standard the standard differential to the bid range, the inputs that come in from the buyers is X, right? So, and now and this all happens in like split seconds, right? And then okay, fine, look, the range that is coming is 100 to 110, and then you look at it and say, okay, fine, the standard difference has been, for example, $5, right? So the system will enter a range of 95 to 105, for example. I mean, I'm just simplifying this now, right? So it will enter that in, even though that week we weren't able to get an input from a buyer because let's say there was only 1 or 2 mills in that market that were buying it, and both of them were on holiday or whatever, right? Or this week they chose not to talk to us or whatever, right? Our system will default to making sure there's no sell-side bias. We will always balance it. And that's why it's the most, I feel that because it's my company and I want to,
Right.
but it's true, I genuinely, I say this in utmost sincerity. I think that we're probably making the biggest effort to ensure there's no bias.
Right. So, all right, lighter side, I guess, or maybe not the lighter side because it's probably it's probably not that light to you. But you got 60 journalists out there.
Yeah.
You guys hear a lot of different shit.
Yeah, of course.
Right, and so you're out there, and then you're reporting on this. So
yeah. Well, we report on 1% of the shit that we hear.
Okay.
Right.
So tell me, throughout all of your reporting and stuff, tell me some good stories about some reporting that you made that made some maybe made some people unhappy or
oh my god. I think I used to own a restaurant a long time ago, and I feel like what we do is very similar to me and my experience in the recycling in the restaurant industry, which is like it's a thankless job, right? Like most people will understand what you do and will appreciate it, but I have so many of the stories.
Just tell me a couple. Like I just want to hear some good stories about how you reported something.
I got threatened once,
and then you got called, and somebody's cussing you out because of what you're reporting.
Oh yeah, so I got threatened once many years ago at a convention in NOLA, in New Orleans, by a guy that basically we have found out that his his venture was being basically being disassembled, by the principal company that had invested in it, and things like that, and and we had it from the principal on the record. It wasn't even like, oh, I called someone and they just told me something. It was on the record. We had an email with all the details and all of that. So I called this person. I said, hey, I understand that your entire venture is being disassembled, and this was a massive enterprise, right?
Right.
And obviously, from a personal side, it's never a pleasant phase.
And you guys were the first one to report this.
Yeah. We had. So here's what had happened, right? At that stage, I still hadn't done it. I just heard about it. I received the official confirmation, all the details.
Yeah.
And then I contacted him to say, hey, listen, I've just found out. And he was livid, right? And I'm like, because he didn't want the news to go out. And on a personal level, and I think this is the other thing that should differentiate you as a business, right? I'm presuming it's the same for you all. It's not just about you have to understand the humanity behind it, right? So I completely understood that. Like, here you are fronting an enterprise that's about to be disassembled, right? It's heartbreaking. It's you're going through stages of personal embarrassment, all of that, right? And you're wondering what comes next. How do I survive this? You're thinking maybe of family finances. There's a lot that you have to process. I get it, right? So I said to him, listen, I'm willing to hold this back for a day. Like, I'll hold it for a day. It's exclusive to us. We have it. Mm-hmm. Give me a comment tomorrow, right? Like, let it settle in. Yeah. Let's chat tomorrow, right? And he says, sure, whatever, right? And then I get a call back at 4 o'clock the same day. So the next day I was like, hey, we need to go to print, but I can't remember. I think the deadline was like 4 p.m. Eastern or whatever, right? I said, I need a comment, talk to me by then, right? So I gave him that window and and sure enough, there was no comment or whatever. We ran the story. 2 weeks later or 3 weeks later, I'm in NOLA for a conference and he's there and he actually cornered me and threatened me, right? And I had received death threats on the phone by people that didn't like the fact that, whatever the publication had issued a price adjustment or price correction or whatever. Right. I had never received a threat in person. And this person literally saw me out and walked across the exhibit floor to catch me while I was talking to someone, right? And just fucking took me to a corner and just started threatening me, It was unbelievable. And I just looked at him dead in the face and I said, and this is the thing, even though I was working for another company, it wasn't my company, right? Yeah. I just didn't give a shit. And I was like, you know what? I've covered wars and I have, right, in the past. I don't give two fucks about you. If you think this is going to scare me, like I said, you're just not doing yourself, you're doing yourself a bigger disservice by what you've just done. Right. The story is already out. It was all done by the book. It was all proper. None of it is inaccurate, right? And it sucks that this has happened to you, right? Obviously no one wants to see anyone fail, but threatening me and telling me you're going to kick my ass and you're going to find out whatever and you're going to make life miserable for me in the industry and I will never make it in the industry because you're going to go out of your way to to ensure that whatever it is you feel that you can do. I mean, this is just fucking embarrassing, right? I mean, and think about, I had been in the industry for maybe 3 years at that time or 4 years at that time, right? I mean, I was a nobody. Yeah. Here's a guy running a multi-$100 million enterprise, right? Threatening a fucking young reporter. Come on, man. Who does that say more about, right? So, yeah, so that was one really interesting one that happened. I mean, there are many.
Too many stories to...
I think for the most part, people understand, right? Look, we don't, I have never indulged in it. And one of the reasons that, personally, I get on really well with a lot of, with most people in the industry is because people know, I mean, they've shared all kinds of things with me. I'm a vault. It will never come out. People trust me, right? You have to build trust in this industry. And, people understand what we do and what my team has to do, right? Davis, even my previous teams, right, at the other companies I worked at, transparency is important, information is important, and they get it for the most part. And sometimes, tomorrow, let's hope it never happens, right? But tomorrow something bad might happen here and I might have to call you and say, hey man, have you had an incident here? Did someone get injured, right? Yeah. And we're not, the weird thing is in the trade publication side, trade publications, on a personal level, we obviously care about the people in our industry and the fact that they're injured, right? But as a trade publication, what we're trying to find out is, hey, has production been hampered because that might impact the price of a material, right? So you might find someone call you and say, hey, listen, really, really, distraught at the fact that, someone's been injured or worse, right? But and while you're grappling with that, at the same time asking you, hey, listen, what impact has that had on your production? Which can, to you as a business owner, sound like an extremely insensitive question because let's be honest, it is, right? But at the same time, that reporter is just doing their job, right? And it's a really difficult line in moments like that for them to walk.
But so you're dealing with that right now, in this region, yes. Cascade. Just recently had an incident very similar to that, right? Where some people got hurt and now mill production is shut down in this region, down in the Portland market. That's right. And so you have a publicly traded company that essentially doesn't want to give you any information. We're waiting for the shareholder call this next week then. Is that kind of what we're...
I think, let me just check very quickly, but I know that we've reached out to them for a comment because everyone wants to have some kind of idea, hey, what's happened, what does it mean for production, what does it mean for scrap consumption,
Because they're a major player in this market.
Absolutely.
When a company like that shuts down, we're talking about it has real ramifications to our market.
I know that as of yesterday, we hadn't received anything. I don't know if we did today, to be honest, because I'm here, I'm on the road, but I can check for you and let you know. I just checked my phone right now. I still haven't heard from my team. It doesn't mean that they haven't heard from them. And it's weird because I think going into the July market, obviously you've had the incident at Cascade. We don't know how bad it is, in terms of like the outage, right? The length of the outage. You've also had the explosion down at Evraz, right? So like, for the domestic shippers, kind of like in this, Pacific Northwest region, going towards Denver, right? Like, so even the material going out of Arizona and things like that, it's a weird domestic market this month, right? Your scrap might have to travel a bit further, right? But yeah.
But how do we do that as a nation? Like, how do we get more steel production back? We have these incidents, right? Like, so probably because these mills are operating at like 90% capacities, given the current demand cycle.
Right.
And so you're looking at it, and everybody knows that we need to bring this type of production back to the States, but it costs too much, and it's also, very challenging in terms of a health and safety aspect of it,
Well, I mean, let's not jump the gun here, right? And assume that like the incident at any of these mills is because they're running all out.
Right.
Let's be careful there.
No, I'm just,
I get what your point. I said, yeah. So like if you isolate it, if you keep these aside and just overall talk about it from the perspective like, hey, if you're running a mill at 90 or 95%, you're running it all out. At what point will it give? How frequently? Would you have to run maintenance more frequently at that point? How do you manage health and safety? I think I have never met a mill that doesn't take safety seriously. Right? Never. I think they take it very seriously, and it's not just a show. Right? Like it is a legitimate thing that they look at, and and they know they should and they do. But you're right. I mean, look, the reason that you're seeing, Nucor, CMC invest in mini mills, right, and put up like the smaller mills in pockets that traditionally never had the large mills, and that's why rebar imports and other long like wire rod imports were coming in. Is because they recognize that there are going to be these pockets of demand, and let's produce it locally, and because there's a market to be had there, right? Will the West Coast see more steel investment? That would be difficult, to be honest. I don't see it, but yeah, I mean, the South is quite attractive. In fact, the South will probably, with Sinton going online and with all the other capacity adds, Big River when they expand, Fairfield when it goes online, I think that that's going to become the biggest market. I still chuckle at the fact that the people look at Midwest pricing, Chicago. I mean, Chicago's been a scrap surplus market for too long now, right? The fact that like industrial accounts are indexed on Chicago busheling, it just boggles my mind, right? Like, you'll hear of people in like Denver and like all the way, like, on the West Coast and in Mexico and stuff like that, selling industrial scrap on a Chicago busheling. I'm like, what? Like, when was the last time they were an important player in terms of consumption of busheling, right? The Southeast is where most share is consumed. The Southeast is where, the Southeast, right, is where more busheling is, so I think that whole thing has changed. Will we see new capacity investment? Absolutely we will. I think the US is a growth story. Your infrastructure spending, and all of that will come, that bodes well. I think finally people are woken up to supply chain exposure, right? So, from your chip shortages to, things like rare earths and things, so we will see a lot of that return to the US.
Yeah.
So
what about the price disparity though? What the mills are selling as opposed to what we're getting for it. Obviously, I'm sure you see my friend Brett Eckhart constantly posting over his unhappiness of it. So
yeah, I mean, look, scrap companies will obviously, especially on the ferrous side, this is I know where you're coming from. This is a ferrous conversation, right? Yeah, the ferrous scrap guys don't like the fact that scrap is 500 or 600 while steel is 1600. And I mean, there's two aspects to it, right? You have to remember that not all steel that is produced is hot rolled coil, right? It's the band producers that can, that have that wide margin. The long product producers are still at $900, $1,000 steel, right? So like relative to that, scrap being at 600, for the long product producers, those EAFs, that, that's where it aligns, right? So obviously there is a disconnect, right, between what percentage of U.S. steel production is hot rolled, right, or sheet, or flat products that can, for example, hypothetically, allow scrap prices to be at 800 or whatever, right? The scrap companies wanted that, and what percentage of our production is long products where they can't do that, right? And so that's one challenge. The other thing is that you have to remember it's a smaller number of consumers. It's a very large number of suppliers, right? By its very nature, right? You might have 50 plants, buying from 10,000 yards overall, right? Or whatever it is, right? And talk about July sentiment, right? July, I've heard people say, okay, we think it's up 20. People think it's up 40. I've heard people think it might be sideways, right? Whatever, right? So let's say that grade of scrap is priced at 500, HRC is at 1600, right? And between now and then, like Turkey goes up another $10. We've seen the West Coast already go up this week on bulk. Let's say Turkey goes up, especially because of this whole Russia export tax thing, and in that next 10 days, let's say HRC goes up another $100, right? So now you have HRC at 1700, right? So suddenly the scrap guys are like, fuck, I love this. I want to go for $100. And a mill steps out in the market and tests the market and says, hey, instead of 500, okay, I'll give you 520. And suddenly, a bunch of players actually sell at 520. That becomes the market, right? And that's the reality of it. Because, companies have to look at cash flow, have to look at positions. They have to, in crypto and in the casinos they talk about the weakest hand, right? But sometimes it's not the weakest hand, it's also an astute hand, right? Like, hey, I don't want to disrupt my business. I don't want to disrupt cash flow. And when that happens, that becomes the market. And so why should the mill pay more?
Yeah. So it's not about what the finished product is selling for. It's about what the market's willing to sell for on the other side then, right? Yeah. So really
it's like, what can I buy it for? Right?
So really you're turning it on us in terms of just being bad sellers. And we just need to hold our material until we get what we need to get out of the mills then. Is that what you're saying?
I'm not calling anyone a bad seller. I think that, now I feel like I'm being asked to become a politician. I have to be very careful. No, look, I'm not saying it's bad selling. I think that it's the nature of how things are sold, right? Like it's just that, if someone can hold, they do hold, right?
Supply and demand.
But also, like, how much ferrous can you hold, right? Ferrous is a huge commodity, right? So you might not even have the actual footprint to hold ferrous, right? Like, I know yards that have held ferrous, and at some point after 2 or 3 months they've had to sell. Like this month they sold, right? Like, but I think that, so look, there's some parts of it that are financial, right? Substitution, right? Like, hey, can I get what price can I get my pig iron, my DRI, my HBI in, to cool off busheling, correct? So that's that aspect also, right? And then the other aspect is, okay, fine, rebar and long products is still 1,000, so those mills can't support $1,000 scrap. Maybe an integrated producer can, for example, right? A sheet producer can, right? But so those are the financial aspects of it. And then there's the very real, like, how I sell scrap. I'm not saying necessarily that you're a bad seller. I'm saying that businesses will, at the end of the day, have to look after their own businesses, right? And if a mill can take advantage of it, right? If as a buyer, okay, fine, I don't need to pay 600. I'm still going to get the scrap at 520. Why would you pay 600 if you're a buyer? Correct? And if you're a seller and you like the 520 price and it works for you and it's keeping your business going and like, yeah, this works for me, I'm happy with it. Because let's not forget, it's still $500 scrap. We're not talking about $200 scrap here, right? A lot of scrap companies will take ferrous at 500 all day long, right? So, and mills know that, right?
But
so I'm not saying it's bad selling.
But why don't mills
before you get in trouble?
Well, but why do mills not just come to the table and operate off of standard contract spreads like what we do on our non-ferrous, right? So I know that whatever the commodity price is, so if you took it busheling at 1,700 or something, right? I know that I'm going to have a $300 spread always on that or something like that. Why can't mills get to that type of pricing platform?
I don't think you would ever find a mill that's opposed to that.
Rather than testing the market all the time to determine what the market is.
I mean, have you asked the mills for it?
The spreads are so wide.
Yeah, but have you ever approached the mill about this? I don't think you'd find resistance to that idea.
Really?
Yeah.
Then why is nobody doing it? Because it seems like that would be a better spread than.
I think the reason that is probably more psychology, right? Like, if you think of like non-ferrous, right? How many times have you truly hedged? Mm-hmm. A pure hedge, just for risk management. Mm-hmm. And how many times have you actually put in a little speculation in it?
Yeah. All the time.
Right? So it's the same thing.
Yeah.
I think that's the same. I think on the ferrous side, like, whether it's the belief that, hey, like on the, there are a lot of like common phrases we hear in the industry, right? One of them being, you make money, in scrap, you make money on the buy, not on the sell, right? And it's actually more true for ferrous than it is for non-ferrous, right? And, so some companies believe they do that really well, right? And why should I sell my scrap on a contract? Because I think that once I've bought my scrap and I have the material on the ground, I've processed it, I actually think that I might be able to get a little bit more. I'm a better seller than my competitor, right? Yeah. So there's that. I mean, and then, in the past, like famously, in the like 2 years ago, a company tried that. They did do a spread to hot roll pricing. and they hedged it. And it didn't work for them because the spread had grown so much that they would have actually got a lot more for their scrap if they hadn't done that, right? And so what happens is like when a couple of people try it and then the industry finds out, oh, it didn't work for that company, then, because in that one incident, it didn't work, right? People get scared, right? And they say, hey, you know what? Maybe we're better off just doing things the way we've done it. And, look, I can't sit here and say that because, that there's one way to do it. There really isn't, right? I mean, there has to be a multitude of ways to, to do these things. And what you're saying is absolutely right. It might work in some instances and, but there's no harm in trying it. And I actually don't think that you ever find a mill against it, to be honest. Like, because even there, if you're telling a mill like, hey, listen, I will guarantee you a supply, right? I mean, because they get to lock in a little bit of that supply, why would they say no?
Right.
Right? It has to work for them and it has to work for you. And sometimes it does. I mean, we have mills outside the US that import scrap from the US that use Davis Index monthly average pricing and contracts. So they've secured volume by saying, hey, scrap shipper, we'll buy, this X tonnage from you every month or every 6 weeks. And, when the week that the vessel is loading, we will pay you a prior month average price, for example, right?
Right.
So things like that happen. Absolutely. And these are happening for large tonnages. So there's no reason why it can't happen
on the smaller side,
yeah.
too.
Just try it. Talk to your mill. Yeah. I would be amazed if they said flat out no.
Yeah. So lastly, last question I want to ask you. I know you're not a West Coast guy, right?
Yeah,
but
I'm an East Coast guy.
I know, but you still got a lot of guys that you're talking to. So where's this Pacific Northwest kind of Canada market? Like, what happens into it in the next? I need you to prognosticate for me for like a little bit. What's going on? What happens in this marketplace?
I think that...
Are we on a growth pattern or are we on a death pattern? Or?
No, I think we're definitely in a growth pattern just across the US. And I think that what you will see from the West Coast is some new routes open up. I actually do believe that we're going to see more West Coast scrap, go into countries like, going to Mexico. I mean, I'm not talking about California, I'm talking about European, Pacific Northwest,
Right.
I think that there are bulk opportunities that will arise for Mexico and for South America. I believe that, with the way things are progressing with China, in about 5 years, when China does start exporting, I think that will become an interesting event for us here in the US. And, because the West Coast and Japan, right, are the two suppliers to Asia, right? I mean, the two largest suppliers of scrap to Asia, right? And over the next 5 years, we're going to see this anomalous pattern where there will be months where China is actually short on ferrous units as it increases its scrap utilization, right? And will need to import. But in the meantime, in the longer picture, it's actually, growing its own domestic processing, right? And it will stabilize at some point. Now, whether that happens 3 years from now or 5 years from now is genuinely anyone's guess, just because the sheer volume of, that we're talking about in China.
Right.
But it will happen, right? So we will see anomalous spots where suddenly, like, every West Coast shipper is really happy because, like, China was in the market for that 2-month window or that 6-week window and, like, send prices up $100 or whatever, right?
Right.
But those will be short-term opportunities, I believe. And I think in the longer term, when we are competing with China, it'd be interesting because our domestic market will be much stronger, Mexico will be much stronger as a producer, and capacity increases will absolutely happen in countries that we ship to, for example, like the Indian subcontinent, but also closer home, in Mexico and South America, right? So, I think that overall...
You think like Vietnam as well coming up?
Vietnam's already quite strong, right? I think, like, look, I mean, we're going to see our scrap change, the processing of ferrous change, because I feel like what China's done, right, and said, hey, we don't want these impurities, right? So you have to ship a high quality HMS if you want to go into, into China today, which is why if you look at all the test tonnages that have gone into China this year, they've been PNS or busheling, right? Like they've been high quality, high grades. People have managed to send in some boxes of HMS, but they've been very high quality HMS, right? So I think that, Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia will eventually look at that. This will become a pattern. I genuinely believe it. India, Pakistan, Bangladesh will probably be the last of the lot to implement those kinds of, those changes. But, the Indian government is like many governments. They don't understand scrap and they will react, correct? So if something goes wrong, traditionally those kinds of, that region will usually be the last to like implementing like an environmental control, right? But if something goes off, they can actually implement it really quick too, right? So you might see that sudden disruption. But I think overall, the Southeast Asian region is adding capacity. I mean, that's, they've already made the investments. There's a lot of capacity coming, and they will need the scrap. So China becoming an exporter of scrap in 5 years will kind of help that,
So in summary, you see a lot of opportunity coming off of the Pacific Northwest here in the future.
Yeah, yes. And I think that, the challenge, as for the West Coast has always been there's just not enough domestic consumption, right? Not everyone has rail cars that can go on $45 freight to a domestic market, correct? In the US, that is, from the West Coast, correct? So, I think that because you're so exposed, like you're so dependent on the export market, right? That you don't have the East Coast ability to, fall back on the Ohio Valley mills or the sort of like eastern region of the Midwest, right? And ship in there. That's a challenge, right? But you all have all known this going into the business, right? So it's unfortunate, because like you look at any business and they say, hey, diversify your supply, right? Like, how do you diversify? So I think that the growth of the possibility to ship into Mexico and and South America, right? As that grows, and maybe, the bulk shippers here add more volume and you're able to ship into their facilities that are doing bulk vessels and you're getting paid a price that competes directly with the delivered mill price here, right? Or whatever, right? Whatever that change is, I think that's coming, right? So yeah, I'm definitely very bullish on the US and the US and Pacific Northwest. And I think that, we're seeing that in just our subscriber base. We've seen so many people from this region get on our platform, right, and move industrial accounts. And like, we've seen mills in Taiwan and stuff like that say, hey, do you all have prices for Seattle and Portland? And, like things like that. And I'm like, so people are looking here, right? They want the supply, and when you see that kind of stuff happen, like this is looking good.
Yeah, it's gonna
markets are markets. You'll see ups and downs, right? But I think overall, you wouldn't be in this business, right? You'd probably sell it today if you thought the future doesn't look bright.
Right. People can always be naive in a market, right?
I mean, all of us are naive with some, with many things. I don't think. If someone tells me, oh yeah, there's not a single aspect of me that's naive, I'd be like, please go fuck yourself. But I don't think that you would invest so much money in a business if you didn't believe it would grow. I don't think anyone's that naive, right? Yeah. I think you could be naive about I think this kind of processing might work, or this kind of I'm going to make this, or I'm going to do this, and I'm going to just watch me go and get 100 new industrial accounts this month or whatever, right? Like, yeah, you can, those kinds of things. But like, no one's going to invest the kind of money that this industry requires if you thought it wasn't going to grow, right? So, and I think that mills will support the scrap companies. Scrap companies believe that mills don't want to, want them to succeed, and mills believe that scrap companies, don't want them to succeed. I mean, many times you see those kind of conversations play out. But I actually think if you peel beneath that, it's a lovely conversation to have at a convention or a bar, right? Why don't you tell me about your experiences, right? Do you actually believe the mill guy's out to get you?
It's just for the scrap companies, it always comes down to the bottom line revenue for us. And, when you have these mills making billions of dollars.
But why? Okay, one second. So let me ask you this. So now let me flip this on you, okay? Right. Let's flip the script.
Okay.
The mill's making $1 billion or whatever you said, they're making great margin on this, and that's accurate, right? They're, because they're all, putting in record profits in their, in their earnings results and things like that, right? But as a scrap company at these price levels, right, 500, wherever we are today, right, depending on the grade, right, 600 on primes, are you not making money?
We are making money, but the problem is that we culturally have a problem, right? Where like we're so competitive in this business that we're going to go out there and we're going to push ourselves to our absolute minimum margin.
Right.
And if and the data shows this. If you look at a typical, because I can go by the data analytics all day long and I can find out exactly what all these companies are making in our industry on an analytic basis, right? And when you look at it, it's like, a 2 or 3% net profit margin on bottom line, after all expenses, right? So you start thinking about that and you go, wow, like we are so naive as a industry that we're willing to take our profit line. And granted, we have scale, right? So we, it's all, they consider it to be all volume based. So, you have to have huge volumes in order to work off of that type of a profit margin. But we're going to be so naive that we're going to take our profit margin just because we're so competitive in nature.
So, but, I guess the question is then how does that change, right? First, but just to preempt that, would you take a $500? So at $500 scrap, at $550 scrap, if you're trading it, it's a problem, right? Because if you're trading that scrap, that means that for the money line that you have access to, right? If you had $1 million, you'd be buying fewer tons because scrap is more expensive. So for trading businesses and brokerage businesses, higher price markets are a bit difficult because it reduces their tonnage, right? Or it means that they have to go out and get some more capital to run the same volume, right? So that challenge I understand. But for you as a physical yard operator, right? Are you dissatisfied at $550 scrap?
If we can move it, and that's what it always comes down to is the markets, at least for me on this West Coast, is like, are you able to move it? Like, are you able to get it prepped in time? Are you able to get the containers, or are you able to like create the contracts and the relationships? A lot of times you go into these domestic mills and the specs, you get shit on for the specs, right? Because they, for whatever reason, they might have the volume that they need. They might be in an environmentally sensitive area that they're operating, and they might not want challenged scrap that maybe other places will accept. So you just run into
right here, you've got two mills that take a very different quality on some grades.
100%. Yeah, two very different disparities in terms of quality. And so, so it has its own intrinsic challenges as opposed to just throwing it into.
But when you take that challenge to the mill buyer and say, hey, listen, you know what, I can't ship you scrap at $5. I need like $5.75, for example, right? What do you hear back from the buyers?
Well, you run into a whole array. I mean, I think that all the mill buyers have pretty seasoned line. It's always the same lines. It doesn't matter which mill buyer you're talking to. It's literally like they go to a mill buyer training school and says like, if a customer says this, say these 5 things. If a customer says this, say these 5 things.
So what are the 5 things?
It's just like, well, you're only complaining when we're making money, but all those other times that we weren't, and I'm like, well, that's not the point here, right? The point is that there's too much of a disparity in terms of the buy and the sell, and they're very seasoned lines. And
but are you able to have the conversation with them where you say, hey, I'm going to offer you some visibility on my margin, because it's not like me just saying, hey, you're making $1,000, but let me show you what's happening here. We can't get boxes to go, so our freight rates have gone up.
I think that those conversations are challenging, because I think that at least for us, when you start looking at the size of supplier that we are, we don't share the same amount of volume that like a Schnitzer Steel or a Sims or even like a Metro Metals are going to be able to provide to these mills, right? So there's very few mid-level size dealers in this region, like myself, like a Bob's Metal. You don't find these types of players in this region. You're either a bulk exporter that has the ability for those markets, or you're a very small scrapyard. You're a very small peddler, and you don't matter. The medium-sized dealers in this, medium-sized volume, where they're right on that cusp of, could we go and become a bulk exporter, or they don't exist in this region. So it's. And also they don't want to support those people in this region, because they don't want to see them be a bulk exporter one day. So they would rather support the small dealers that they know are never going to be. And so really it's about, so do I feel like there's a bit of price fixing? Absolutely.
When you say price fixing, what do you mean by price fixing?
Meaning that collaboratively, when I say price fixing, it's not like as if they're coercing together, right? But what they're doing is they're making an assessment that, do we really want to support this individual on tonnage and see them grow any bigger than what they are? Or do we want to support the smaller ones that we know will never become a market threat to us? And so it's really a strategic play that these consumers will make. And so that creates a challenging market dynamic for
because so from your perspective, you're like, hey, I want to grow in volume so that I get to have the power that these big companies have when they take their volume to a consumer, right? And they get to set a better price, correct? So from your perspective, you're like, volume is king. I need volume, right? Some of the smaller yards will go, hey, I'm happy being a small yard. I can still make good margin. I can be a supplier of shredder feed to these shredders that are competing for it, and I can make good margin, right? I mean, like your earlier business, right? And the mill buyer is going, we've seen companies grow big on volume, and now we can't even negotiate with them. We need their tonnage, and that's a separate conversation too. So everyone's had their different experiences, which kind of informs the structure of how y'all tussle, right?
Right.
And it's a tussle, and it is from our perspective, right, when we look at it, it's a fascinating tussle, right? Like, we don't pick sides, and by our very nature, we're not meant to, right? Which is actually quite convenient for us,
right?
Because
very convenient.
It is. I'm telling you, it is, right? Like, it absolutely is convenient.
Everybody always wants to be Switzerland, right?
Well, because you have to remember, we're in the industry, right? We're a part of the industry. We're not like a mainstream media publication, like some, like the Times or some Chronicle, that's just from the outside, doesn't understand this industry.
Everybody wants to be Switzerland. I want to be Switzerland. I wish I could be Switzerland.
I'm not saying that we are Switzerland. I'm saying that we are completely. Like I said, it's fascinating for us to watch it, right? Like, please don't misunderstand me, right? I actually would say that from a reporting perspective, from what we publish, it is convenient that we get to hold this like unbiased, like, hey, let's keep it in the middle, right? That line, because it allows us to talk to both sides, correct? And it allows us to interact on both sides. On a personal capacity, I actually do see scrapyards struggling. I do see recycling facilities struggling. And it doesn't matter to me what the mills say about, like, oh, look at the scrapyard owner, he owns his own chopper and his own plane or whatever, right? Because that's a handful of people, and I think that there's a ton of medium-sized companies and a ton of small companies that actually do need mill support. And what I mean by that is that it's not that the mills aren't supporting them. I feel like, which is precisely to your point, like, hey, what is the harm in helping this company grow? Because like, our industry is absolutely a relationships industry, right? And I don't think for a second that, for example, let's say tomorrow you go on and become a bulk exporter, right? And a mill helped you along the way, right? Your consumer helped you along the way and said, hey, we will support you, we'll help you grow, and we'll give you volume commitments, and we'll help you make a little bit better margin, because right now we can, we've got $1,000 spread, or, on our metal, on our finished metal or whatever, right? If that allows you to grow and you get this continuous support for 10 years, I don't think for a second that you would be the kind of person, or any scrapyard would. Let's not say any. I mean, there might be one or two people, right? But I'm saying for the most part, our industry, because it's built on relationships, most companies will appreciate that and support that. So even when they become that big bulk exporter, they will always, hey, yeah, you got my back, I will give you the volume every month, and do you know what I mean? Without because that's a symbiotic relationship, right? And I feel like, you see this all the time, especially in regions where, the mills are kind of like more remote, more springboard markets, right? Like, you might find like a scrap company taking, undue advantage of a smaller supplier, right? And that's a shame, because at the end of the day, this is a very tough industry to succeed in, and all of you, put in, I mean, God, every day you're putting out way more fires than, and tackling way more, we've got environment coming after us from all sides, right? Like air, water, stormwater, right? I mean, there's all that stuff. And then you've also got your people that don't do any of it and are still recycling, correct? So a lot of people that don't, and how do states put in enforcement? So you've got all that shit. Then you've got politicians that don't understand it, and, local activists that don't, I mean, like, and then just, handling equipment, and, equipment can go back. I am in awe of all of you that run these facilities, right? Because there's just so much to do. Like, honestly, my life is way easier than yours.
Yeah.
And I recognize that, and I'm genuinely, I sit there and I watch all of you, and I think that some of the mills that own scrap facilities, I think they get it, right? But the problem is that some of the scrap facilities are so large, right? And they have such unique positions in the market, right? And they have so much access to information, their own information, that, it allows them to maneuver, in ways that are very different to, how you would be able to run business here. And I do believe that if there was a way for, us as an industry, consumers, mills, to work better with scrap companies, I think overall we'd be a much healthier industry, and maybe we'd be less bitchy as an industry. Do you know what I mean? Like, because there's a lot of you see this materialize every 3 or 6 months, where like suddenly something changes, right? And like now it's the scrap companies that can go off and say, gotcha, and then suddenly like 6 months later it's like the other side, and now it's a buyer's market, and the buyer goes, gotcha, right? why are we in that? You know, like, there doesn't have to be so much friction. Friction is good, the tussle is good, it keeps you on your toes, right?
Yeah.
But we don't have to have so much friction, right? We don't have to have so much hatred, you know. And maybe this is like the you know, the most sensitive side of me, just saying like, oh, you know, la-di-da, I wish that, you know, things were a little friendlier in our industry, you know, and people might call me stupid and naive, but I don't see why there can't be a little more kindness, a little more like, hey, listen, let's just help each other.
I think it's a lot of old school mentality. I think, you know, and I think that people do things and people believe that, you know, I always say that there's that mentality of where it's like, you go and you take an industrial account from somebody or something like that, right?
And they hate you for life.
And they hate you, and now you're target number one, and they're like, well, that's mine,
right?
And what's yours is mine, and they forget that no, like this is a competitive business.
Yeah, stay competitive. Yeah.
And people get to make their own choices. You know, like our industrials get to make their own choice who they want to do business with.
Absolutely.
And if you've had them for 30 years and you couldn't keep them, like you need some self-reflection.
Oh, absolutely. And think about how a lot of those industrial, I mean, if we're talking about industrials, think about how a lot of those industrial accounts were set up, right? They were set up on, you know, on formulas, on prices that were fictional. And the industrials had no idea that like the prices that they were actually being, you know, contracted off were like not even representative of the actual market, right? So a publication would have a price that was, you know, half the actual market or whatever, and the industrial had no clue, you know, and now they're waking up to that and they're finding out like, oh, hang on, you know, the market's actually, you know, different, right?
Yeah.
The price is actually, oh, really? That's what I should get for my scrap, you know?
Right.
And you know, and if a scrap company's held on to those contracts and, you know, not really open the, you know, the door to that transparency, that visibility, and that's one of the reasons they lose. And, you know, obviously with industrials, everything is customer service. It's, you know, there's a whole bunch of things, and, you know, but competition is good, right? It should exist. I think like when you're competing with other scrapyards, that's great. You know, we were talking earlier about like, does your customer support you, right? So you've got two kinds of customers, right? And which is why it's a thankless industry, right? Like, you've got you know, you've got the guys that supply to you who are your customers, right? And then you've got the people you sell to who are also your customers, right? And like on one side, you have to support your supply base, right? Because that's your volume, right? But sometimes it doesn't happen on the other side, and that's where it sucks. And I feel like if all of you feel this frustration that, hey, we wish our mills and our smelters and our furnaces, you know, did better by us to help, especially companies of this size, right, and smaller, you know, grow. I think that that's a very valid piece of the feedback that mills should consider. Genuinely, you know, and I personally, you know, I would absolutely side with that and say that, you know, I don't know how many people listen to this or watch this, you know, but you know, if they do, then I think there's absolutely food for thought there, and you shouldn't. If you're worried about, you know, margin squeeze and survival and things like that, and the mills don't see it, you have to remember the flip side of that is that every small yard will cease to exist, every medium-sized yard will cease to exist, will be completely consolidated into like a handful of very large companies, and then all the mills are fucked, right? So they absolutely need the middle tier and the smaller tiers to survive, you know, and to be healthy. It's not about survival, right? You don't want to sit here and work your ass off 20 hours a day to make, you know, whatever, 1% of, you know, overall. Do you know what I mean? Like it has to make sense, right? There's the stress is just not, forget anything else, right? The stress is just not worth it, right? So, you know, I think the mills that do, and you know that, I mean, you know, there are mills that absolutely get this and do really well by there. And when we say mills, I'm talking about even the non-ferrous, the smelters and the ingot makers, you know, there are some that work really well with their suppliers, right? Like, you know, some of them have programs to reward suppliers and rank them, and, you know, like it's great, you know? And the ones that don't get it, I think that if they don't get it, if they truly don't get it, they should realize that it's short-term thinking. In the long run, if your supply base dries up and gets consolidated by just a couple of big players, you just fucked yourself.
Right.
Are you happy with that response?
I'm good. I'm good with that response.
Because it's the truth. It is the truth. You know, so you know.
Hey, well, thank you for all
piss people off then.
Thank you for all the thoughtful conversation, Sean. I really appreciate it. You know, and
Chad, thank you for getting me in a lot of trouble.
So
I can't wait to see you know, what the fallback is.
Absolutely. There's always fallback when you're dealing with when you start talking with me. But you know, and please make sure you go check out Sean's site, Davis Index. Make sure that you're getting the information accurately. He is the most accurate reporter, I believe, in the market. So
thank you very much.
Always speaking the truth, whether it's on camera or on the screen.
That just means always getting in trouble.
Yeah. So, thanks, you guys.